Every dispute holds two different sides. Every objective lens demands honesty. Knowing your fundamental rights, securing absolute justice.
I told you, let's a guitar.
Really, Dr. Patel?
I don't care what you think it is. Open it right now, or I will have you removed from this building.
I told you it's a guitar.
You think this is funny? Sitting here wasting everybody's time?
I was sitting in a chair.
Yeah, sure you were.
Sir, what are you doing?
Hospital security guard Hosea Fitch watched a black man sit quietly in a lobby chair with a guitar case resting between his feet and, without exchanging a single word with the man, without observing a single threatening gesture, without any justification a reasonable person could point to, picked up his phone and dialed 911. He reported a suspicious individual with a possible weapon, because in his mind a black man with a large case in a hospital lobby was a problem that needed solving. When two sheriff deputies responded and arrived at the lobby, they approached the man, David Anderegg, and ordered him to open the case immediately or face arrest for obstruction. What Fitch and the deputies did not know was that David Anderegg was a respected independent musician with a devoted following across multiple continents. That the case at his feet contained a handcrafted heirloom guitar passed down from his late father, an influential jazz musician whose work had quietly shaped a generation. And that a single racially motivated phone call would set in motion a lawsuit that would cost the hospital $970,000, end Fitch's career, and force a reckoning that spread far beyond one hospital lobby. If you are ready to see institutional racism taken down, like this video and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now, because you won't want to miss tomorrow's story of cops messing with the wrong people and finding out. Let me know if you enjoyed the story. Let's continue. The security office at Aldwell Regional Medical Center sat just off the main corridor, separated from the lobby by a wall of reinforced glass and a row of monitors that fed live footage from cameras positioned throughout the building. Hosea Fitch had worked that desk for 6 years. He knew the rhythms of the lobby the way a conductor knows a score, the mid-morning surge of outpatient appointments, the afternoon lull before visiting hours opened, the specific quality of stillness that settled over the waiting area when the PA system went quiet between announcements. He knew what normal looked like, which made what he did next all the more deliberate. Fitch was already dialing when the call connected. His voice came out measured, unhurried, the voice of a man who believed completely in what he was saying. He described a suspicious black male in the main lobby. Large case, possible weapon, refusing to engage with staff. The dispatcher asked if the individual had made any threats. Fitch said no. She asked if he had approached the individual. There was a pause that lasted just long enough to be telling. Fitch said the situation required law enforcement. He had not spoken a single word to David Anderegg. Rewind by 30 minutes. And the lobby of Aldwell Regional looked the way hospital lobbies always look on a Thursday afternoon in early spring. The automatic doors at the entrance opened and closed in a steady rhythm as visitors moved in and out. A woman at the front desk fielded 2 calls simultaneously, her voice professionally calm, her pen moving across a notepad without pause. Orderlies wheeled patients toward the elevator bank. A group of staff members in scrubs crossed the space in a loose cluster, their conversation dropping to murmurs as they passed the seating area. The PA announced a doctor to the second floor. Somewhere near the vending machines, a child asked a question that went unanswered. It was busy without being frantic, routine without being sleepy, and there was not one thing happening in that lobby that would cause a reasonable person to feel unsafe. David Anderegg sat near the east wall, in one of the upholstered chairs that lined the perimeter of the space. He had his phone in his hand, a pair of wireless earbuds in, and his father's guitar case standing upright on the floor between his feet. He was 38 years old, lean and composed, dressed in dark trousers, a fitted olive Henley, and low boots that were worn but well kept. His appearance was unhurried and neat in the way of someone who takes quiet pride in presentation without announcing it. He looked, to any objective eye, like exactly what he was a man with, somewhere to be later, killing time while he waited. He had been in that chair for 23 minutes. His wife, Elena, was on the 3rd floor for a follow-up appointment with her cardiologist, a visit that had been scheduled for weeks and that David had rearranged 2 session bookings to attend. The appointment was running long. He had checked his phone twice, sent Elena a text asking how it was going, and returned to the playlist he had been building for an upcoming live set. The guitar case at his feet was not incidental. It was the kind of object that carried weight beyond its physical dimensions. The case itself was a dark, rectangular shell of reinforced leather and aged brass fittings, worn at the corners in a way that spoke of decades of travel. Inside it lived a handcrafted acoustic guitar built in the early 1980s by a luthier in the Mid-South, commissioned by and later gifted to David's father, Raymond Anderig, a jazz guitarist of formidable skill and almost no mainstream recognition. Raymond had spent 30 years playing clubs, sessions, and small theaters, building a reputation among musicians who understood what they were hearing while the wider world moved on without him. He had died 6 years earlier, leaving behind recordings that a small but devoted community of listeners still circulated, and the guitar, which David had played on exactly 4 times since inheriting it, because it felt too significant to treat casually. He had picked it up that morning from a luthier who had spent 3 weeks doing restoration work on the neck. He'd brought it to the hospital rather than leaving it in the car, because the case was worth more than his monthly car insurance, and because some things you simply do not leave unattended. David himself was not unknown, though you would not know it from looking at him. His indie music career had been built in the spaces that commercial radio never reached: self-released albums that circulated on niche platforms, a YouTube channel that had grown without promotion to over 300,000 subscribers, a mailing list of listeners spread across 11 countries who treated his releases as private discoveries they shared in careful whispers. He had never sought visibility. He had learned that from his father, who believed that the music was the point and the audience would find it if it was real. That philosophy had served both of them in the same quiet, complicated way, deeply valued by those who found them invisible to everyone else. It was that invisibility, the deep, ordinary kind that lets a man sit in a public chair without becoming a spectacle, that Hosea Fitch had decided to interpret as a threat. From his position behind the glass, Fitch watched David the way a man watches something he has already made up his mind about. He noted the case. He noted the way David sat still for long stretches. He noted the earbuds, the downward tilt of his head toward his phone. None of it was unusual. All of it, through the particular lens Fitch applied, became suspicious. He told himself he was doing his job. He told himself the case was too large to ignore. He told himself that protocol required him to act on instinct when instinct said something was off. What his instincts were actually responding to, though Fitch would not have been able to name it cleanly if asked, was the color of the man's skin in a space where Fitch had appointed himself arbiter of who belonged. There was something else running beneath his certainty, quieter, older, not fully formed into conscious thought, a flicker of something that tightened in his chest when he looked at the case. He had played guitar himself, once. Badly, briefly, long enough to know he lacked whatever it took. Long enough to have stood in an audition room and been told, politely but finally, that the band was looking for a different sound. He had never fully reckoned with what that rejection had cost him. He kept it folded away, but it surfaced sometimes, at odd moments, in the form of a resentment he could not quite locate the source of. He finished the call, then he sat back and waited for the deputies to arrive. They came through the main entrance 6 minutes later, 2 sheriff's deputies moving with the particular posture of men who had been told there was a possible weapon in a public space and had calibrated their approach accordingly. They scanned the lobby briefly, located David, and crossed the floor toward him with the kind of unhurried authority that is designed to communicate that resistance has already been accounted for and dismissed. David looked up from his phone. He pulled one earbud out. He watched the 2 uniformed men position themselves in front of him and understood, with a clarity that arrived before any words were spoken, exactly what was happening and why. He was told to open the case. He was told that failure to comply would result in arrest for obstruction of a lawful investigation. The lobby noise, the phones, the PA, the ambient hum of a building in operation seemed to drop a register. Several people nearby went still. David set his phone down on the chair beside him. He reached forward, unlatched the case with both hands, and lifted the lid. The guitar inside was immaculate. Its spruce top caught the lobby light and held it. The rosewood fretboard ran clean and dark toward the headstock, where Raymond Anderig's initials had been inlaid in a small, careful flourish decades before David was born. The strings were new, freshly installed that morning at the luthier's bench. The instrument was visibly, unmistakably, and entirely a guitar. The lobby held its breath. Then David reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, opened the camera, and pressed record. He asked for names. He asked for badge numbers. His voice was level, not raised, not broken, carrying the specific, controlled register of a man who understood that how he conducted himself in the next 60 seconds would matter enormously. The deputies exchanged a glance. Fitch, who had appeared from the corridor behind them, went very still. By then people had begun to turn. An elderly couple near the far wall had stopped their quiet conversation and were watching openly. A nurse, who had been on a break near the vending machines, straightened and crossed her arms. A family, parents, and 2 children who had been waiting near the reception desk moved slightly closer, not aggressively, but deliberately, in the way of people who have decided not to look away. The lobby of Aldwell Regional Medical Center had seen a great many things in its years of operation. What it had not seen, until that Thursday afternoon, was a man open a guitar case and hold the room accountable for what it found inside. The deputies did not leave. That was the first thing that struck the people watching, that even with the case open, even with the guitar sitting in plain view under the lobby lights, the 2 uniformed men did not step back, did not acknowledge the obviousness of what they were looking at, did not offer any version of an apology or a retreat. Instead, they shifted their stance and began speaking in the lower, more managed tones of men attempting to reframe a situation that had already gotten away from them. Fitch, still hovering at the edge of the scene, said something about protocol, about the call being a standard precautionary measure, about how these things happen. David did not lower his phone. He stood with the camera running, patient and deliberate, capturing every face and every syllable. His expression had not changed significantly since the moment he opened the case. There was no performance in it, no raised voice, no theatrics, just the steady, unwavering attention of a man who understood that what was happening to him was not a misunderstanding, it was a pattern, and patterns required documentation. The crowd in the lobby had not dispersed. If anything, it had quietly grown. Word moves quickly in enclosed spaces, and what spread through the waiting room in the minutes after the case opened was not a rumor, but a visible, ongoing fact that anyone with eyes could read. The elderly couple near the far wall had not moved. The nurse who had been on break now stood with 2 colleagues who had come out from behind the reception desk to see what was happening. The family near the entrance, the father, the mother, the 2 children who were old enough to understand something serious was unfolding, remained exactly where they were, watching. Nobody in that lobby was pretending not to see. The deputies were attempting to conduct a quiet exit from a situation that had no quiet exit available to it. The elevator at the far end of the lobby opened, and Elena Andrigg stepped out. She was still wearing the small paper wristband from the cardiology check-in, and there was the particular tiredness on her face that comes after a medical appointment, the kind where you have been asked careful questions and given careful answers and left the room. Still not entirely sure whether to be reassured. That tiredness lasted approximately 3 seconds after her eyes found the cluster of people near the east wall and located her husband at the center of it. What replaced it was something different entirely. She crossed the lobby without hesitation and took in the scene with the rapid, comprehensive attention of someone assembling information quickly. She looked at the open guitar case. She looked at the deputies. She looked at Fitch. She looked at David's phone, still recording, and then she pulled out her own phone. What Elena showed the deputies and Fitch over the next several minutes was methodical in a way that public confrontations rarely are. She pulled up David's artist page, the streaming numbers, the international tour dates from the previous year, the press features from music publications that did not write about people who were not worth writing about. She pulled up photographs of David performing, a seated figure with a guitar on a stage in Amsterdam, a close-up of his hands on the strings during a session in Atlanta, a backstage image from a festival in Montreal, where 3 other artists were visible in the frame, all of them well known, all of them clearly comfortable in his company. She showed them a photograph of Raymond Andrigg, a black and white image, slightly grainy with age, holding the same guitar that was now sitting open in its case on the lobby floor. She showed them the luthier's receipt from that morning with the instrument's estimated value printed at the bottom in plain figures. She did not raise her voice during any of this. She did not need to. The deputies had stopped speaking. Fitch looked at the floor. A hospital administrator who had been summoned from somewhere upstairs arrived at the edge of the scene and immediately understood that whatever damage control she had been sent to perform was already operating on a significant delay. Elena stepped slightly away from the group and made a call on speakerphone. The attorney who answered had represented the Andriggs before a civil rights litigator with a practice built on cases exactly like this one. Cases where the facts were clear and the institutional failure was documentable, and the question was never whether injustice had occurred, but whether anyone would be held to account for it. The call lasted 4 minutes. By the end of it, the word lawsuit had been spoken aloud in a hospital lobby with deputies present and a phone camera still running, and no one in earshot had any remaining uncertainty about where the day was heading. The administrator attempted to intervene to offer a private room, a formal apology, a supervisor's direct line. David declined. He wanted to remain exactly where he was. He wanted the recording to capture the space, the faces, the ongoing fact of his presence in a place he had every right to occupy. Around them, something had begun to shift in the lobby's atmosphere. The family near the entrance, the father had started speaking to another man nearby, a stranger, and what he was describing from his own experience was not the incident they had just witnessed, but a different one, from a different city, a different year, that had ended differently and less publicly. The nurse standing with her colleague said something that made the woman next to her close her eyes briefly and nod. The elderly man near the far wall had his wife's hand in both of his and was looking at David Anderegg with an expression that was not pity but recognition, the look of someone watching something they have known about for a long time finally become visible. Do you think spaces like this, hospitals, waiting rooms, ordinary public places, should remain spaces where this kind of profiling goes unchallenged? Drop a comment. Share this story if you think it deserves to be heard. The conversation matters. The administrator returned to her office and made several calls in rapid succession. Internal security logs were pulled. The 911 recording was requested. Fitch's personnel file was opened by someone in human resources for the first time in over a year. And what they found there, tucked into the formal language of incident reports and response forms, were 4 prior complaints. 4 documented instances in which black and minority visitors had reported being followed, questioned without cause, or made to feel unwelcome in a facility they had come to for medical care. 4 complaints that had been reviewed, filed, and not acted upon. The administrator did not share this information with David or Elena that afternoon. But it was there, waiting, in the way that institutional failures always wait, patient, recorded, ready to be discovered by anyone with the standing to demand access. David sat back down in the chair he had occupied for the better part of an hour. He did not put the guitar away immediately. He let it sit in its open case, visible, unambiguous, exactly what it had always been. He thought about his father, not the version of Raymond Andrigg that lived in the photographs Elena had been showing, the one caught in performance or in moments of professional recognition, but the quieter version, the one who had come home from auditions that hadn't gone the way they should have, and sat in the kitchen for a long time before he spoke. Raymond had told David once that the music was proof of something the world might never fully acknowledge but could not entirely erase. You carry it anyway, he had said. That's the point, not the recognition, the carrying. David had been carrying it for 6 years since his father died. He was still carrying it now, in a hospital lobby, under fluorescent lights, with 2 deputies somewhere nearby, and a phone recording still open on the chair beside him. The attorney arrived 40 minutes later, unhurried, prepared, carrying a leather bag, and the particular calm of someone who has walked into rooms like this many times and knows exactly what to ask for. She requested the complete security footage from the lobby cameras covering the full afternoon. She requested the 911 call record and dispatch log. She requested Fitch's personnel file and the names of the responding deputies. She noted everything she was told and everything she was not told. Before she left, she handed the administrator a business card and explained, with professional clarity, what the next phase of this process would look like. The lobby had mostly returned to its ordinary rhythm by then. Appointments were still being kept. The PA still called doctors to their floors. But something had changed in the building's relationship to what it told itself about how it operated, and the people who worked there felt it even if they could not yet name it. The evidence assembled itself with the kind of quiet thoroughness that David's attorney had seen before in cases built on institutional negligence. Security footage from Aldwell Regional's lobby cameras covered the full afternoon of the incident with uninterrupted clarity. It showed David Anderegg arriving through the main entrance, locating a chair near the east wall, setting the guitar case down, and spending the next 23 minutes doing exactly one thing, sitting. The footage showed him checking his phone. It showed him adjusting his earbuds. It showed him looking up occasionally at the elevator bank. It showed precisely nothing that could be interpreted, by any reasonable standard, as threatening behavior. And it showed, from a ceiling-mounted angle that caught the security corridor entrance clearly, Hosea Fitch observing David from behind the glass for nearly 8 minutes before picking up his desk phone and making the call. The 911 recording was worse. Fitch's report described a suspicious individual behaving erratically, refusing to engage with staff, and possessing a case of unknown contents that could contain a weapon. The dispatcher's log showed that when she asked whether the individual had made threats, Fitch said no. When she asked if he had approached the individual to assess the situation, the recording captured a pause of 4 seconds before Fitch offered a non-answer. The call had been made based on nothing. The documentation made that impossible to dispute. The personnel file was worse still. 4 complaints, spanning 3 years, each one filed by a black or minority visitor to Aldwell Regional who had been questioned, followed, or otherwise singled out by Fitch without documented cause. One complaint came from a man who had been visiting his mother in the oncology ward and been followed to the parking structure and questioned about his vehicle. Another came from a woman who had been asked 3 times for her visitor's badge despite displaying it visibly. Each complaint had been reviewed by someone in the hospital's administration. Each had been classified as resolved. None had resulted in any formal action against Fitch, any retraining requirement, any probationary notation in his file. They had been received, processed, and set aside with the institutional efficiency of a system that preferred paperwork to accountability. David's attorney added them all to the file. It was during the discovery phase of the lawsuit that the detail emerged which reframed the entire incident in a way that none of the parties involved had anticipated. A background review of Hosea Fitch's history, the kind of comprehensive personal and professional excavation that civil litigation makes possible, surfaced a document that had nothing to do with security work. It was an audition form, dated 26 years earlier, submitted to a small jazz collective that had briefly operated out of a rehearsal space in the same city where Fitch had grown up. The collective had been organized and led by a guitarist named Raymond Anderegg. Fitch had auditioned, he had been rejected. The form was brief, 2 lines of handwritten notes in the margin, the kind that get made during auditions and are not intended to be archived, but sometimes are anyway. The notes were not cruel, but they were definitive. The audition had not gone well. Raymond Anderegg's collective had moved on without Hosea Fitch, and Fitch had moved on too toward a different life, a different career, a slowly calcifying resentment that he had never fully identified or examined. Whether Fitch had recognized the Anderegg name when he watched David sitting in the lobby chair was something no one could establish with certainty. He claimed he had not. The claim may have been true in the strict, conscious sense. But the lawsuit's psychological dimension, the question of what accumulated in a person over decades of unprocessed failure, and how it sharpened itself against race and assumption and opportunity, was not lost on anyone who reviewed the file. The irony was structural and precise. A man whose rejection by David's father had helped build his resentment had directed that resentment, years later, at the son, and had lost, finally, in a way that cost far more than a missed audition. Aldwell Regional Medical Center settled the lawsuit 9 weeks after it was filed. The figure was $970,000. The hospital's legal team had reviewed the footage, the 911 recording, the personnel file, and the audition document, and had determined that proceeding to a jury trial presented an unacceptable risk. The settlement terms were specific. Fitch was to be terminated immediately, with no severance beyond what was contractually mandated. The hospital was required to implement mandatory bias recognition training for all security and administrative staff, to establish an independent complaint review process that operated outside the direct supervision of department heads, and to develop written protocols governing when and under what circumstances security personnel were permitted to involve law enforcement. The terms were not negotiable. The hospital signed. Fitch appealed his termination through the appropriate employment channels. The appeal was denied. He found work, eventually a position that paid less and carried none of the authority he had grown accustomed to, in a context where his name was not yet known. It would not stay unknown. The case had been covered by regional news outlets and several national ones, and his name was attached to the public record in the way that public records attach themselves permanently to people who have made decisions that cannot be walked back. The 2 deputies who had responded to his call faced no formal discipline. Their conduct, while aggressive, had fallen within the technical parameters of their department's guidelines for responding to a weapons report. But the case entered the sheriff department's internal training materials as a documented example of independent assessment failure, the specific liability that arises when officers respond to a third-party report without verifying its basis before escalating. Future training cycles incorporated it. The incident became, in the quiet language of institutional correction, a lesson. The regional ripple effects took longer but moved further. 3 other hospital systems in the surrounding area conducted internal reviews of their security complaint logs in the months following the settlement. 2 of them terminated staff members whose records revealed patterns similar to Fitch's. 1 overhauled its visitor relations protocols entirely. None of them acknowledged the Anderegg case publicly as the catalyst. All of them knew what it was. David used a portion of the settlement to establish a music mentorship program for at-risk youth in his city. The program offered instrument instruction, studio access, and performance opportunities to young people between the ages of 12 and 19 who had no other formal path into music education. He named it after his father, not with Raymond's full name, which would have felt too large and too public for something Raymond himself would have wanted kept quiet, but with a phrase Raymond had used often, a direction he gave his students when they were overthinking a difficult passage: just carry it. The program grew. David's online following, the 300,000 subscribers who had been discovering his work in careful, private ways for years, responded to his advocacy with the kind of loyalty that builds slowly and holds. He spoke at events. He gave interviews he had previously declined. He played the heirloom guitar at community sessions where young musicians sat in folding chairs and watched his hands move across the strings and did not yet know the weight of what they were looking at. The guitar was not a symbol, or not only a symbol. It was a specific object made by specific hands, played by a man who had carried his gift through decades of under-recognition and passed it on to a son who had done the same. Until one Thursday afternoon in a hospital lobby when the carrying became something else, evidence, testimony, the quiet center of an accountability that a system had long deferred. David kept it in its case, mostly. He played it when it felt right. He set it in its stand in the corner of his home studio and looked at it sometimes in the evenings when the light came in at the right angle and the spruce top caught it the way it had caught the fluorescent light in the lobby of Aldwell. Regional, clean and unhurried, and entirely itself. Some things cannot be made suspicious. Some legacies outlast every attempt to diminish them. And some instruments, built to be played and passed on and played again, are simply waiting for the world to get quiet enough to hear what they've always been saying. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and share it. The conversation about who gets to exist peacefully in public spaces is one worth keeping alive.
If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with someone who would appreciate it, and let's keep building this community together. And before you go, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what stood out to you the most. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next.
Transparency is an ongoing commitment, and education provides your greatest safeguard. Thank you for watching and empowering a truthful world.